Hello and welcome to Montro In Practice. Every frameworks read well on paper. This is a series of conversation with people who've actually done the work about how it really works in reality, not on a slide. Every episode, one practitioner and a few honest questions. I'm Ankur Arora, co-founder of Montro. Today, I am with William O'Sullivan. Will is head of data science, leading data and AI strategy and data governance as the foundation of Trustworthy AI. He builds production AI models using in commercial and regulatory settings, including work with US and EU regulators. Will, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Ankur.
Where is the biggest gap between how trustworthy AI looks on paper and how it actually works in reality?
Well, that's a great one. Okay, so we're starting with the big questions. How trustworthy AI goes from the theoretical to the practical and the kind of problems that emerge when you do so. I I think the biggest gap that we tend to see is in a lot of time communication as to what should my AI model do. I think a lot of times when we start having conversations about the strategic big picture of the role that AI should play in our business and how we should be able to invest trust in the AIs that we are, tasking with helping us improve our efficiency, help us improve our decision making. A lot of the times, stakeholders and project sponsors and folks who are involved in trying to make that decision um, work for the business have pretty high hopes and high expectations, uh, without having the understanding maybe of how the predictions themselves get parameterized out the other side. I like to talk in terms of two big families of metrics. The first is model performance. So these are things that you can just measure about the model itself based on the data you're training. And that's great for someone like myself with the technical background where we can, talk and tune and tweak and improve the model against a few target parameters that we might have. But I think really the biggest gap between, what tends to emerge from the discussions versus what emerges in practice is wonderful. Well, I have a model that is, performant again on paper, and I don't know how to trust that as a human being, right? Because I can believe that this score is a very good number based on the established metrics, but I don't know how that improves my decision making. I don't know how that informs that. So we have, the model characteristics and the model metrics. What I try and, you know, what I try and communicate, because this is the biggest gap and it's recurring for every project we see it, is how do we go about communicating the actual metrics of significance to a decision maker, right? Because we never want to be in a position where we are blindly trusting an AI, but we do want to be in a position where our data is working for us. It's working for us in an intelligent way, and it's working for us in a way that we can trust. And so it's parameterizing that trust by talking about the amount of data you're working with, by talking about kind of what your alternative kind of hypotheses could be for why you're seeing these results, being able to deliver an explanation on top of the AI says this, the model metrics are good, so we can believe it when it says that it thinks this. And this is why we as experts in artificial intelligence could surmise that these are the reasonable explanations. And again, there are steps and frameworks and processes you can put around that, but those tend to be really tailored to the specific problem being solved. Whereas model metrics, you can pick up a load of those off of Wikipedia, have your model measured against them, and that still might not leave you in as good a place for making decisions as you might need to be for your given use case.
Yeah, I like how you speak very objectively. Well, you spoke a lot about metrics and you lead data science, but you
hmm
speak a lot about governance first. Why start with that?
Well, candidly, nothing's going to get moving unless you have kind of the right systems in place to get people agreeing about A, what the problem is, B, how to solve it, and C, going to the actual trouble of implementing the solution you've discussed. Um, you know, Governance gives everybody a common language, especially in a field where that common language might not be ubiquitous, right? From my background working in the food and cosmetic space, a lot of times the folks who I work with at First Pass when I'm onboarding a new client or when I'm working with someone new, they are coming with an expertise in their field. They know how to get safe products shipped, but they know nothing about model performance metrics, or they don't know about hyperparameter tuning, and they don't know about any number of kind of key data terms that might go into what a data lake is, or what a data warehouse or a mart might be. And so good governance is in my opinion typically driven by the development of good planning, and in particular what I see as your big win for any AI based application is having a firm data management plan that gives everybody the same hymn sheet to ultimately sing from when it comes time to talk about, we started this project, we delivered the contents of the brief, and this is how it's actually useful, this is why we did it, and where we're going.
That's very interesting. And how do you really build AI models that stand up to regulatory and scientific scrutiny?
Building models that kind of stand up to regulatory and scientific scrutiny is a really interesting challenge. It's one of the things that I love so much about my job and about the great team that I have who are capable of building these models with me, right? I think there are two classes of challenge that jump out at me as being the big ones, right? The first is in a way because I find it to be a tractable, like convergent problem, is the easier one. It's you build really good models on really clearly mapped data that has expert input at the level of defining the contents of what I call, or what are called rather in the industry, data dictionaries, right? So these are breakdowns of, if you were to take any Excel file in the world and you were to look at how it has, typically if it's a table, columns at the top, being able to translate what those columns mean, when that information can be really, really scientifically dense, is critical for building a model that captures the nuance of those relations. So again, good fundamentals, good data management begets good technical modeling, and good technical modeling typically satisfies the scientists that we get to work with, because any result we can stand over and say is statistically defensible, that's great. Um, the regulatory side is a bit more of a divergent problem, right? There can be a lot of right answers, funnily enough, in the regulatory regime. Again, because a lot of the folks that we work with in a regulatory context themselves are scientists, we get to use this initial technical building block, to again build rapport, build trust, build communication. And then when it comes to crunch time, when decisions have to start getting made, this is where we tend to engage in a more conversational dynamic to establish, okay, what is the end goal you need to be able to support here? What report are you drafting that needs this result formatted in a certain way? What presentation are you giving next week that requires certain results? Uh, you know, Setting up a model for regulatory scrutiny is a lot about making sure that the regulators are armed to kind of, you know, help you help them in a lot of ways. And so when you've sufficiently armed the regulators themselves, because it's not like we're petitioning regulators with, we've come up with a fun, cool model, have a look at the results. It's typically a case of they've asked us as experts in the field of artificial intelligence, overlapping with food and cosmetics and chemistry, to come and give them a hand with some of the more complex modeling and the complex data capture part of it. So the regulatory approval is not us saying, regulators, run with this. It's us working hand in hand with regulatory partners and making sure they're armed with the information they need to do their job to the best of their ability.
That's very interesting. And something that's intriguing for me is that is being compliant to a regulation also means trustworthy, because you say that building trustworthy AI systems, is that implicit in your language that you are helping it keep compliant, or is it beyond, much beyond that?
Well, it's funny you say it like that. As far as I'm concerned, it's absolutely implicit, right? We wouldn't be working at a level of scientific or regulatory scrutiny if we weren't, again, hitting the fundamentals, right? All good data management plans are based on a good understanding of what compliance and what obligations are we, what do we have to meet in order to start engaging in this work in the first place. So for sure, that's groundwork. That's table stakes, is what I would say it is. If you're going to play in this space, you need to play with compliance in mind.
And where does it break? Where does usually the AI trustworthiness actually break?
Where does AI
do they break?
trust?
Sorry, go on.
No, sorry. That's a great question. I'd like to say normally it doesn't break, and it's maybe not meant to, right? Because the trustworthiness, I think, I think the trustworthiness is less about modeling results, because again, modeling results are tweakable, tunable. They in a lot of ways they can be interpreted and misinterpreted. So the trust really comes from, again, how do you have conversations about what this model is really meant to do? And I think the regimes you'd see a lapse in kind of the trust in the AI component is when there's been a breakdown in communication, right? And it's funny. I think a lot of folks who are technically inclined, like myself, don't love when I say, guys, I think we might be the problem, because the models, again, they will stand up to scrutiny, they will stand up to metrics, they will be something you can evaluate in isolation, and they will be technical and clean and delivered precisely. And then the messy bit is when we talk to stakeholders and we've used a bit of jargon unintentionally, or we've misheard something and interpreted it based through the lens of how we think about the problem in a technical manner. And if there's ever going to be a lapse in trust, it's because, I misinterpreted this thing and I sent you a report saying, and this is the super important finding when you actually asked me to give you something else. So luckily, those are only ever slips that are in many ways explainable by virtue of human error. We've been very lucky to not have slips in terms of this model told me something really, really important and wrong. We don't deal so heavily in the realm of hallucination prone um, large language models. Again, we do scientific-based modeling, which means we lean a lot of our work on existing literature. We build off of models that other scientists have prepared and have passed, through rigorous enough peer review. Again, when we're collaborating with regulators, they are experts in their field. A lot of the time, we have so many support structures and redundancies in place to make sure that the AI component of it is fine, that the only chink in the armor is, have I misspoken or have I misheard at the end of the day?
Yeah, that's very interesting because I spoke about trustworthiness and regulation in the same line because really interested in, is regulation really catching up and catching up to a level that it's holding everyone who's building the model accountable for the trustworthiness for its AI model.
Is it holding everyone building the model accountable? That's an interesting one. I'm not a lawyer, right? So
Hmm.
caveat there. I tend to be of the opinion that the data regulations that are in place. So the big ones obviously are GDPR for when you're dealing with sensitive information. Again, California has its own data protection laws as well that we navigate when we work with companies in the US as well, because we are Ireland based. When we work with our controls for data management and data protection, accountability is made manifest in the systems that you have in place to, demonstrate compliance with these regulations. When it comes to AI modeling, again, with the EU AI Act there are loads of provisions around, very specific treatments and use cases of different kinds of artificial intelligence. Again, a slim window of the experimental work that we would carry on at any given time might touch on the low threat side of the AI Act work. I would say there's not a massive regulatory burden for folks who are building, again, in the scientific and regulatory space. If we were working on some great big Facebook posting machine that very heavily used natural language processing and was coming up with cool interpretations of the news, then for sure we'd start, ratcheting up those levels of interest. So goes the EU AI Act. But for us, the accountability is very much baked into the data management. And once we're all squared away there on what data is where and who should have access to it and under what criteria should it be used, then when it comes time to modeling, everybody's been given the right brief and the people who are going to have the right permissions to model creatively, right? To meet the ultimate objective that you're hoping to work on as part of a given AI project.
Yeah. No, it's really good that you're mentioning that the AI trustworthiness is also fundamentally banking on the general data governance that exists
Big
inside
time.
the company. So maybe continuing on what you mentioned, as EU AI Act lands,
Mm-hmm.
what changes for data science teams, how their governance evolves?
So I'm speaking a little bit more for some friends of mine, essentially, who work in sectors that are more heavily impacted by the EU AI Act. Again, chasing the the chain of providence, essentially, being able to demonstrate that when I have been given this suitably compartmentalized data, have I made sure to use it in a way that is compliant with the EU AI Act? As for the mechanisms that they are using in their own companies to do this, I don't have a window into their company, so I can say that, in terms of what it affects my day to day for the EU AI Act, it is a case of we start a new project, we evaluate, does this one touch on anything that we should be, getting concerned about? And the answer is more or less an emphatic no.
And maybe from your own experience, do you think that the industry is ready, and then maybe the specificity of your industry, do you think the industry is ready to embrace a regulation like EU AI Act and is equipped to comply?
That's a great question. I I feel like it's a good two-parter, right? I would say that my US counterparts tend to be less prepared for being met with regulation like the EU AI Act, given that, when they're starting in their domestic regime, and they are then beginning to move operations into Europe, because again, great market access in the EU, really talented folks here across the continent, across the all the member states. Uh, when American businesses try and move into the EU and try and abide by US playbooks, those fall down. They're not built for what is a very consumer protective environment, and what is, admittedly more regulation heavy when it comes to tech than the US is. It's an interesting point that you make, because I think it stands as a kind of compressive force against a lot of, maybe not a lot of growth in the EU, but definitely the bar for startups in the EU is higher on account of the regulatory burden, getting all the ducks in a row, especially for someone who's not an expert in them up front, or who has the ability to quickly hire in someone who's a compliance consulting expert. Not being able to access that makes it harder for small businesses to get started. But I will say, for the companies that are established in the EU already, this this regulatory positioning and the likes of the EUA Act coming in maybe isn't a massive shock for a lot of these companies. And for those who are really affected by it, they tend to have the money to deal with those kind of problems anyway. So it's a kind of it's almost like a non-Newtonian fluid in a way. Like the harder you hit it, the harder it is. But if you're just moving slowly enough, or if you're at a low enough, revenue, then you know what, they're not particularly onerous, which I think is nice design. As for, do I think these companies are equipped for it? I think when it comes to chasing, and I think this has been a long-standing historical problem. So I don't think it's uniquely confined to AI or even to data. Um, there definitely would have been a lot of CTOs, pulling hair out over why are people in the company installing weird softwares to their job that we don't have approval for and we don't have licenses for, any kind of that shadow IT that would have come up. I think as the use of AI becomes more ubiquitous, we're probably going to see more use of shadow AI. And I think that the flavor of problem, which is you will have some employees who are either finding shortcuts or innovating, and sometimes the difference between the two is actually much smaller than we might think. And keeping tabs on that kind of stuff is really difficult. I mean, again, for us as a small company with kind of a limited aperture for trying out crazy new things, because we're very focused on, okay, we have this one scientific avenue we need to pursue, followed by this regulatory avenue we need to pursue an industrial avenue. We're tightly boxed, and I have optics over basically all the AI modeling that's going on, as does the rest of the management, because again, we have a very great open conversational dynamic to make sure everybody's kept up to speed on all the bits and pieces that are in place. Do I think every organization benefits from having such an open and communicative culture around tech and having a management that are uniformly interested in kind of these developments? I don't think so. As for what I think they can do about it, that's a bit of a tough one, right? Sometimes that expertise just isn't in house, and they might have to consider going outside the box to, find a way to become compliant with these situations, or even to assess that they might need to be compliant. I think that's a big one as well. I think arguably maybe some of the worst offenders might even be the people who definitely need to be compliant and have no idea about it.
Yeah. That's very interesting in terms of people need to know they need to comply based on what they touch, what data they touch, and most importantly, the impact their decisions are making on both internal and external stakeholders. And I think that awareness is very much needed in order for people to be equipped. First, I think before getting equipped, I think awareness is the most important thing. So yeah, absolutely.
On that as well,
yeah.
I do think at an Irish governmental level, I do think we might be following the same approach that Spain has taken in terms of setting up an office for AI essentially to help kind of massage along, making sure that Irish tech companies are compliant with the EU AI Act as well. So it's helpful that things are starting to get aligned to start targeting people who might not know that they need to be compliant. So again, as with all things, these wheels turn slowly though. It's a matter of time until the folks who are uninformed become informed, and until there's enough information out there that people can kind of become passively informed just by bumping into information out there. If you're not looking to find the problem basically, because you know it should be there, that you might just not find it.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. And you spoke a little bit about regulation, and also a little bit about AI and AI Act. And one of the key questions that I keep wondering about, and I keep discussing with some of the folks that I talk to, is like, in practice, how do you really prove to the regulator? Because for proving to the regulator that you are compliant, you need evidence.
Yeah.
What does evidence mean for an AI system? What would you actually have to show to a regulator that you are compliant?
What would you have to show to a regulator that you are compliant? This is a great question. I think that it's very easy to discover divergences between paper policy and evidence of practice. I think a part of that comes from how do you wrap the veracity of your policies in, and I mean this with love in my heart, in a really boring, arduous process that creates a lot of evidence by doing it, right? In the same way that there are cryptocurrencies that use kind of the proof of work regime to establish units of those currencies. In the same way, evidence is in the after effects. It is in the wake of carrying out compliance activities and documenting those. As to what those compliance activities look like, again, luckily we get to lean a lot on kind of what data and good data practices look like. And again, with GDPR having been so well established, those are routine processes that more or less you can in some ways, not always, right? Again, not a lawyer. There are processes there that you can kind of piggyback on to say, okay, and we've extended this now to target data marts that we might be using for training specific AI models, or we might be using this to again capture provenance for outputs of these models, and then to version control and timestamp, and again demonstrate that we're tracking this, we're deleting this in due course, we're keeping the aperture of AI focused on what is predictive and useful and performant, and then discarding what is not when that data is no longer needed. So again, taking care of the full life cycle of both the underlying data and then the AI that serves it as well.
That makes sense. You briefly spoke about the difference in approach between US companies or US counterparts and European companies or counterparts.
Hmm.
And one of the key things that keeps coming up is the speed of adoption. Do you think being more regulated impacts the speed of adoption, or is it even helpful or derogatory? Or, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's funny. I think that where regulation might slow adoption of technology is tied to that earlier problem of people realizing that they are triggering something that evokes a regulatory response. Think that there are many situations I creatively imagine, right? Where someone is trying a new tool and they share it with their coworkers and everyone's like, "Wow, I really love doing this." Unknowingly, again, under that premise like the shadow AI, having created a compliance obligation without maybe even knowing it. Do I think I think culturally it should mean that European companies are more informed about the ins and outs of the AI systems that they are using. I definitely think where those concerns don't even really have a US element to them, they're free to kind of fire away, as it were. They are more than happy to get moving with a new tool that's going to potentially improve our productivity or give us an efficiency gain. Let's just get to it, and then maybe when we breach the EU market later on, there will be a compliance thing that we'll do as part of our due diligence and discovery for accessing a new market. So it's I think if anything, companies that are in a position to start looking at other markets would also tend to have that kind of co-occurring situation of they have the resources to properly investigate their new compliance obligations, whereas companies already embedded in in the EU markets might simply say, "Well, I'm still doing it, and no one's basically told me not to, so I will continue as I've begun." Again, not a great position to be in with any regulators, but a position that I can very easily imagine a company slipping into.
That's great. And if I am a team or any team trying to get AI ready, what does a good data governance look like for them?
Well, that's a great question. I would be a big fan of. This is going to be a bit of a mouthful. Maybe not actually if I say it properly. The DAMA, so DAMA, data management body of knowledge. So that is a pretty extensive text on where to get started with data management, and it does target like real big enterprise grade companies. So this would be almost, as far as I'm concerned, like the holy book of data management, because everything that you might need as an Amazon-sized company is kind of captured there. And again, they are very exhaustive in a lot of the structural and governmental or governance-based elements that you would need to execute good data management throughout the entire company. And that's not even just dealing with limited data for a project. That is, how is all of your data from all of your internal departments interplaying with each other? How are you keeping, the siloed data unsiloed where need be, and how are you making sure that access is restricted as required? How are you working with customer data and making sure that's also, treated with the same degree of reverence as internal data? That would be my go-to guidance, and I would say again, because most companies aren't Amazon-sized companies, funnily enough, there are things in there that need to be stripped back for kind of smaller enterprises. So for small medium enterprises, they don't need the full shebang. What they do need though is to have someone in their organizations who understands the lessons in that kind of book, right? This is my go-to. It could be that there's another take on data management that is equally valid and equally protective. Um, as long as someone is being trusted and is being responsible for carrying that out on kind of with the company's blessing to do so, of course. I think that would be a great starting point for anybody who's trying to help organize and build a better data culture at their company. Because again, culture begets kind of the systems that support the culture, and that gets to be a virtuous cycle as well.
And shifting gear a little bit,
Hmm.
for a company who's effectively using AI as of today, what would be their first step to be more compliant with AI governance?
I think the big one, if you want to if you want to uncover whether or not you need to be compliant, you need to register. You need to understand the AI models that you and your team are using, that other teams are using. If you have to ask other managers to get a lowdown on what's going on in other teams, for sure. And you have to have an understanding of, when you are building or using tools, even in a casual sense, if your business development team or sales or marketing team are working on anything that is sending out AI related copy, that is using something like ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or anything else like that, uh, you for sure just need to know, because until you know, until you take a measurement of your system, you're only going to ever be guessing about what you need. That's got to be the first step. Write it down. Ask people the uncomfortable question of, and what AI are you using? This is for the AI register. We need to know this so we can determine whether or not the entire company is compliant. And it's might be a little heavy-handed, but again, regulation gets to be a little bit heavy-handed. That's part of its job.
Yes, and when you build the register, let's say you did the hard work to actually build that register, keeping that updated is another
Well, that's a
task.
pain. Oh, for sure, for sure. I think this is when we circle back to the question about how do you prove compliance. The evidence is generated in, we made this very painful to assemble document. It's worse the first time around. It gets easier, but it doesn't get easy. We put in a load of work the first time around to get to the point of having a register, and now we have a monthly or a quarterly or every 6 months cadence update. Again, I would definitely say that the folks who are probably closest to the technology need to have their usage reviewed most frequently, because they're the ones who are, tend to perhaps be ahead of the curve, tend to be working on new developments sooner, and are more likely to try and find new tools to help them do that. If you're not checking in, you will be working from old data, and by virtue of checking in, you are demonstrating proof of compliance as one part. Sorry, proof of compliance. You are generating evidence to support the argument that you are compliant. Because if you have an up-to-date register and policies and controls in place that you are also generating evidence for, these are all just going to be very harmoniously helping support that picture of you as an organization that knows what's going on in your own business.
Yeah, and as a register, when you imagine the register, an ideal register, do you see that all the models that are internally built is as a separate register from everything that is used from third parties, or is it some kind of unified register that has everything that the company is using?
This is a great information organization question, right? And I think I've almost even got to start my response by challenging the premise of an ideal register, right? Because your ideal register could arguably be a 2-column Excel file that says this is the file name, this is where to find it, and everything else might flow from there. Again, having a master register of every model that has ever touched, model or tool that has ever touched your workflow, is a valid option for some companies depending on how they're shaped. If like for the work I do, where you have a team that is dedicated to building models at a project by project basis, it makes sense in our regime to compartmentalize. These are our third party tools. These are the things we've built internally. These are the teams that these third party tools touch, and then this is how we refresh our different compliance obligations at those points. Because again, once we've built the model, and whether or not it's still in production or whether it's been deprecated and replaced by a different model, we don't need to do a monthly check-in to see, oh, all right, has Kevin from the data science team suddenly started wanting to generate insights of his own? That doesn't happen. We are kind of working for the clients, making sure that they have the information that they need. So unlike a company ChatGPT subscription where you might be able to ask it some fun questions about holiday planning in your off hours, you're probably not going to get a lot of super useful information out of I wonder what the upcoming sunscreen formulations might look like from from a predictive toxicology perspective. So for sure, different kind of assets might merit different registers for different speeds of renewal, or you can smack them all together if that's what works for you. Again, the reason that I was so keen to say I would challenge the idea of the ideal register is because the real ideal is the one that works. Like you must be prepared to find the pragmatic route to compliance, because these things get messy and complicated, and all it has to be is demonstrative and maintainable. Beautiful is actually not a requirement for a data register. It's got to do what it needs to do, and it needs to be able to work for you and for the business.
That's very interesting and a good way of putting it there.
Thank
Right.
you. Appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, last one.
Sure.
And I ask everyone this: if a leader changes one thing this year, what should it be?
The leader changes one thing this year in their entire organization, or what kind of leader are we talking about? Because I think it matters.
Yeah, I'm talking about a leader who has the influence and control of the things that you're working on.
Okay, for sure. So someone who'd be able to kind of influence, data curation and AI strategy as well. These things that help go from the abstract ideas that the stakeholders might have and translating those into the construction of tools that support the tactics that, connect back to that strategy. If you are someone of that persona and you had the ability to do kind of one thing this year, ooh, what is the highest leverage thing you could do? This is a great question. I think the highest leverage thing that you could do is very succinctly define what your own protocols for communication are. Because again, actually earlier on when we were discussing, where does trustworthiness in AI fall down? Trust is the fundamental component of any engagement, of any interaction at all. And for any leader who's working in any sector, you're always going to be working with people. You're always going to be working with someone else. And when you are working with, technology that some people have particular preconceived notions about, you need to understand how to talk about the results that you're getting and how to communicate those out to folks. What that might materially look like is moving away from talking about modeling metrics and talking very much in terms of the problem that you're helping solve, right? Because I think because no real world model is perfectly accurate or perfectly predictive, it's kind of maybe not super unfair to say that, all models are to some degree wrong. But we want to be working on useful models. And the way you make a model useful is by making your end stakeholders better informed and by having some degree of traceability to kind of supporting the decisions that your tools are helping to create, right? So I think maybe having a map of when I build this tool, for a stakeholder, what tactic does that stakeholder, carry out that this supports? And then how does the tactic that they carry out support the overall strategy of the project? If you can map out those three steps, you're able to keep your technical team happy, you're able to keep your stakeholder happy, and you're able to make them look good, and then you're able to support the ultimate aims of your project sponsor and stakeholder. So that would be it. Those would be those three elements there to make a nice quick soundbite out of it.
Wonderful. Thank you. And before I let you go, Will, three quick ones. One
Sure.
book or a piece everyone in your field should read.
Everyone in my field should read. Oh boy, that's a good one. Everyone in my field should read. Oh, what was the most recent one I cracked through? You know what? I'm actually going to go ahead and maybe give a little bit of a pivot on this one. When I say that the communication is such an important part of it, I think as technical folks, we have a hard time landing on the kind of we have a hard time landing on the business side of what our model should be contributing to. I'm actually a big fan of the book by Josh Kaufman, the Personal MBA. Even if you're not a business head, it is actually written as a very technical reference book, which is what made uh, it so easy to read for me, I suppose. Bunch of quick headings, bunch of great detail, really helps you get into the mind of the person you're trying to communicate to, because very often you will not be talking to someone who has a rigorous and deep background in your specific field of artificial intelligence or of data management. You will be talking to someone from a diverse multitude of backgrounds who ultimately land at the same uh, point of, oh, cool, that's a really neat technology you're working on, but what does it actually do for me? And I think reading
Mhm.
through that book helps give a lot of context as to when I'm doing this work, I'm doing it in service of an overall business objective. How do I help get to that point of something useful has come out of my work? The book recommendation I go with.
And what one person worth following in your field?
One person worth following in my field. I I would be a Karpathy fan for sure, Andrei Karpathy. I
Mm-hmm.
think, as voices in the field go, he's one of the least crazy ones, and that happens to be a metric I care about a lot. So again, I would say, uh, if you want to be following CEOs for what's hip and happening in the world of artificial intelligence, by all means. If you want to really get into the meat and potatoes of it, follow folks who are working closer on the research side of things. What they say will satisfy you more, I think, than some of what might be otherwise a lot of marketing copy that could come out of different CEOs whose job it is, right? Because there's different jobs. If you're a researcher, you want to discover new things and share cool ideas. If you're a CEO, you want your business to get a nice valuation at the end of the day. So would definitely recommend just following, again, like Jan LeCun would be another one. Following the researchers who know what they're talking about.
And one thing that you feel is overhyped or underhyped in the industry right
Oh,
now.
this is great, actually. This is a great question because
so underhyped myself, and I still actually haven't managed to give myself the time to look into it properly. The new GLM models. Basically, everybody else is talking about cloud models and new GPT models like Sol. GLM is catching up, and it's kind of a bit of a sleeper hit. I would definitely keep an eye up to at the moment. I think what they're working on is really interesting, and their approach to modeling is also super cool. So yeah, keep tabs on that. We'll see where that goes.
Wonderful. Well, Will, this has been genuinely useful. Thank you. Where should people find you and your work?
So look, the easiest way I suppose would be through my LinkedIn. It'll be like William O'Sullivan instead of with the apostrophe there. It's all hyphens, and after O'Sullivan it will be hyphen MSc for my master's in high performance computing.
Thank you, Will. This has been great. And
Appreciate
speak
it,
to you
Ankur.
soon.
Catch you later, man. Bye bye.